Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. I've got the laptop out here on my stand. I've got my mouse mat perched on the keyboard with the mouse on, so we won't press that too hard, otherwise we get all sorts. I've zoomed in on the screen so the writing's bigger, so that I don't have to keep doing that to read it, because I'm used to having a big screen behind the laptop. I've cleaned the fog off my glasses. I've turned the kit off. I've done everything I possibly can do, but I can't turn the rain off, I'm afraid. It's been doing that since I got up at about an hour before silly o'clock, and I think it's going to do it for a lot of the day. Unfortunately, given what a rather special day this is for an awful lot of people, that's not really wanted. Anyway, questions and answers. There's 24. And if they got 2 minutes each, it's adding up well for an hour. Now, some of them will be very quick answers, but some of them, need a little story to go with them. I've got them oldest to newest, so the one who put the first question up there comes first. I get channel names, not people's names. I will do my best to read those out and make sense of them. That's not easy in all cases. Right, first one then is the Kawapenki, regular commenter, viewer I assume. Hi Roger, if bulbs from Oncidiums like sweet sugar are matured, need they a time of dryness to get into bloom, or do we just hold on to our normal watering and feeding schedule? The Oncidium alliance varies. Under normal circumstances, a lot of them start producing their spike before the bulb is mature. Some even start their spike as the leaves are coming out, so well before the bulbs mature. Others have to be fully mature before they spike. Not so many of those though. So I would say if you have fully mature bulbs with fully expanded leaves that have completely finished growing and you haven't got a spike, sorry, the chances are you're not going to get one. You have to wait for next time. But as far as I'm concerned, watering and feeding schedules, this is going to come up several times, are geared up to, is this plant currently growing anything? By anything I mean leaves, bulbs, canes, roots, spikes, buds. Is anything on this plant growing? Because if the answer is no, you need to cut right down on feeding and watering. If, however, it's got new growths coming out left, right and centre and filling your pot with new roots, you need to feed and water much heavier and ease off when it's not. That goes for all orchids, quite honestly. Are they growing? Yes or no? So that's that one. Carol Sykes. Hi. Hi again. It's a question about whether I should be watering. This has come from me saying things like at the start of the video, right, I've just finished my watering, and then carry on talking. Carol's interested in what I mean by that. Well, I use it as a generic expression. It means something has been thrown on pots or mounts. Content not mentioned. Right, so let's go on then. Should I be watering with plain water in between feeds during the warmer summer weather? Growing season, I assume. It's particularly the orchids with media that drain quickly, like Cattleyas, that I'm concerned about, because the salt dries on the exposed roots. And I don't mean the monthly flush, just watering. Right, well, in the growing season, summertime, what do I get up to? I've got too many plants to individually deal with a plant. So I've divided them up into sets. We have the cooler, shadier set. That is Masdevallias, I haven't got any Draculas anymore, Restrepias, Miltoniopsis, the Odont types, and a few others that go in that set. He quickly looks around to see what I've missed. Now that'll do. Now they get watered on a separate schedule. Most of them are in a media now that they've been repotted with moss in it, so they hold moisture because those types tend to like to stay moist. Then we move on to the ordinary pots. They're in a variety of mixes. Some dry faster than others. I can't go round doing some of them and then some others and remembering which ones I've done. So when I water those pots, I water the lot. So if they're getting a feed run, I feed the lot. And then the oddities are the holy clay pots, of which there are now only 6. 5 Cattleya types and 1 Dendrobium. All the others have gone. But they get watered on a separate schedule because they dry much quicker. So they're in a separate set so that I can handle them. And then there's the mounts. So what do? This time of year when things should be growing, in amongst those will be some that aren't growing. Grr. But I can't separate them out. So if I'm doing a feed run, they're going to get fed on that particular set. And in the main, I'm feeding 2 or 3 times and then giving a plain water, a flush. But the frequency is geared up to what's going on. Now we had a sunny day yesterday. I got 24 degrees out here for the first time this year. In the other place I'd have been getting 24 degrees in March if the sun came out and hit the glass. But I can't do that anymore, so I have to adjust. So basically I have a think about what's been going on. Have we had dull days? As the sun, now that it's started hitting the roof, raised the temperature a bit, to adjust the frequency, but not what's happening. Yeah? So I tend to feed 2 or 3 times, depending on what circumstances have gone. That third feed being added on if things are growing well because they've had better conditions for that period in between. And that period in between for my normal pots at the moment is about 7 days. Better weather, a little bit warmer, that'll come back to 6 or even 5. The cooler, shadier set, it's more like 9 or 10 days. But then those pots hold their moisture longer. So that's okay. The holy clay pots, the ones that dry out the fastest, that's about every 3 days, sometimes 4 if we've had dull weather. The mounts are every day when it's good, every other day when it's not so good. Yeah? So then the feed goes with those frequencies. So the mounts are getting fed like 2-3 times a week. The ordinary pots are not, because they only get fed once a week, only get watered once a week. So that's sort of more along like the lines. If you're worried that salts are building up and sticking to the roots or anything, just flush them, especially if they dry quickly. Just chuck plain water on it, give them a good wash through. Better still, if you can do it without all the bark floating off, give them a dunk in plain water and let them soak for a while. And that will dissolve any salts that are is in the pot, the bark and the roots, all in one go. Then pour some more clean water on to wash that water out. That's about as clean as that plant will ever be. And don't feed too heavy. You know, residual food left in the pot is because the plant couldn't get hold of it. So the chances are that was a bit too much. And if it's drying quickly and you're watering more often, reduce the feed right down. Yeah? You see what I mean? Because you're watering quite often, so you don't need so much. Right, that was a long one. Right, so the next one only gets 10 seconds. And this is 19YVO, is the channel name. Is it normal that the canes of a Dendrobium nobile shrivel up a bit while they are blooming? Yeah, chances are there's not quite enough hydration getting in there. A good blooming on a nobile cane is quite a drain on the system. You know, if you think you've got that cane as a storage organ, and all of that material that those blooms are made of has come out from those resources. And if it's doing that on quite a few of the canes, it's using up resources quite heavily to get those blooms made as a structure. So quite honestly, as those buds are increasing in size, you ought to be perhaps watering and feeding a little bit more than you were before. It's natural for nobile type canes to shrivel during that rest period in the winter, but not too much. If they're starting to there's not enough hydration getting in there, despite them supposedly resting. Don't get hydration muddled up with feeding. Hydration is just water. It just keeps things plump. Right, that's that. Now we've got Naomi Mittel. Sorry, I was just thinking that's not a question because it starts with good idea. I presume that's the questions and answers. Getting a lot of new growth in my Dendrobiums which I had repotted. Should I anticipate blooms to follow, or should I anticipate having to wait another cycle? I know this is a rather general question. Yes, because I'd have to come back with what sort of Dendrobiums. But in the main, Dendrobiums grow in the growing season. That's how it got its name, I think. And during that period, they should mature those canes, bulbs, whatever you want to call them. I call them canes on Dendrobiums. Many of those will bloom at their blooming time, which tends to be spring in towards the beginning of summer. So that cane started last spring but blooms this spring. Some Dendrobiums need a year, so they grow through one season, they don't do anything the next season, they hold their leaves and everything like that, and they don't bloom till the following one. Some go a 3-year cycle, not so many. Yeah. So to get a growth on a Dendrobium that starts in the spring and it blooms before the next spring is unusual. So that's that. General questions, a general answer. Right. Mary Camilleri. What should I do if canes on nobly are shriveled but not completely dead? Had no flowers too. Should I repot into new medium and check the roots? If it's shrivelling like that and not bloomed, chances are you should have checked the medium and the roots some time ago. Noblies can lose a root system and therefore they cannot be hydrated. If a root system isn't functioning, then no hydration can get into the plant and they will shrivel. Now if there's enough energy left in that plant to produce some new growths, those will produce some new roots and it will sort of get going again. Some canes on Dendrobiums that shrivel badly will never plump up again. They just stay as they are, and when they're shriveled like that they can hold hardly any hydration or nutrients to back the plant up, sort of thing. You can have a go at repotting, depending on what part of the world you are in. Northern Hemisphere, it's not too late to repot nobly type Dendrobiums, but if you've got no blooms and no new growths and it's badly shriveled, it might have gone beyond recovery. That's that one. Where are we now? Oh, this is a name in a language that adds letters in that is not in my language, so I can't pronounce that. I'm going to spell it. There's letters together there that in my language don't go together. So we've got Victory, spelt Viktori, and then I don't know whether the J goes with the I or not, followed by Astumpf. We don't get a P and an F together either. Might be silent, I don't know. Anyway, the question's in something I can read. I have a question. I bought a Dendrobium phalaenopsis, first orchid of this time, never had one, 2 months ago from a supermarket. The media was bad and smelly, so I repotted the plant and it had a few roots coming, but I find that the majority of the roots in the pot were rotten, so I cut them off. Good. I use medium-sized bark and sphagnum moss mix. Oh, hang on, this is a read more. I've got to press a button. Try not to press any keys under the mouse. Oh, blimey, there's loads more. Yeah. And the canes are shriveled, and I'm worried that the plant won't make it. I water it when the media is almost dry, and sometime in between spray the new roots with a little water. The plant is in the window seat on the east side. I presume that's Northern Hemisphere, so east side, late sun if any. What can I expect from the plant, and am I doing something wrong? Should I fertilise now when there is not much roots left? Simple answer, no for that. I'm living in intermediate climate, so similar with UK but with less rain. I hope that doesn't... I'm assuming you're growing in the house, in which case the rain doesn't matter. If you're growing outside, then if the plant's getting rained on a lot, I'd move it somewhere else. It's not going to be able to use that water if it hasn't got a good root system, so the plant will just get wet and it won't do it much good. Medium-sized bark and sphagnum moss is okay for that sort of plant. It's got a few new roots. Quite honestly, it's dependent on those roots. If those roots get going and produce some sort of root system, it will save the plant. If those roots fail, and there aren't any others, it's not going to make it. But it's dependent on new growths. The new growths will produce new roots. So see what you can do. Next we've got... I've done it again. I'll say the name properly rather than what I thought I was going to read then. It's Nari Pittman. Not Natalie Portman. That's twice I've done that, and it was in questions and answers. I have a healthy Cattleya which hasn't bloomed in my care. I have a new sheath which I can now see buds through it when the light shines behind it. Yep, that's good. The sheath seems to be drying out and almost dying, but the buds are still growing. Is this normal? Nice one-word answer, yes. But watch the shape of your buds. When they get to the top of the sheath, if they appear to be bending over, you might need to just nick the top to let them out. But I've always advised people those sheaths are there for a reason. So don't cut the top off to let the buds out when the buds are small, because you're going to let moist air in, and that's part of why the sheath's there, is to stop that happening so that they don't rot. Okay, but occasionally buds do get stuck inside a sheath. But yeah, the buds will just push through. So that's that one. Right, where are we now? Oh, it's another one from that one that I spelt out, starting with Victoria. I'm experimenting now with orchids that are not Phalaenopsis. That's everything else then. I've also bought a Cymbidium. I'm confused about the care. I put it outside on the terrace that is looking to the east. The day temperature is now 21 degrees, the night is 12 to 15. Is that too cold? No. That's fine. Yeah. Someone said heavy on feed and water. I don't understand what that means. It looks like that question got cut off somehow as well, because it just stops sort of before the end of the sentence. Cymbidiums are classed as heavy feeders when they're growing. They produce a lot of leaves and big bulbs, and to do that, especially if they're doing more than one on a plant, they need help. They need some good feed. I can't explain what good feed is, because it depends what you normally do. I mean, some people, when they feed their orchids, they all get the same. It doesn't matter what sort of orchid it is. Now, I don't do that. My cooler shadier set, Masdevallias, Restrepias, first of all, they don't get much feed at all, and they don't get it very often. They'll get 2 lots of plain water and then a very low feed. Yeah, that's totally different to the other pots, totally different to the mounts, and certainly different to the holy clay pots, which are Cattleya types. They get heavy feed. So whereas my cooler shadier set might get 80 to 100 parts per million of whatever fertiliser I'm using, which isn't the same each time, it's a complex subject. I could do an hour on just the feeding and watering, but that's evolved over many years. Whereas my Cattleyas I would class as I feed heavy, and as I do my Cymbidiums, and that's like 300 to 350 parts per million. And I'd be happy for the Cymbidiums to go up to 400 or even 450 parts per million when they're outside actively growing. Because don't forget, when they're outside actively growing, they will get rained on in this country. Yeah, it's doing it now. And as such, they're getting flushed every time it rains, so you've got to keep topping them up. So yeah, 12 to 15 for Cymbidiums is not too cold. I know people that put them in unheated greenhouses. They keep them dry in the winter time, but that, you know, they're down to sort of 4 or 5 degrees. When I first got the Cymbidium that I look after for Hannah, it's been repotted now, so it's on a low shelf. I brought that home and I put it outside by the dustbins where it could get some rain, so that I didn't have to keep watering it. And I forgot it, and it stayed out all winter, in all weathers, including snow, and it was fine. Well, it lived. I wouldn't say it was fine. It could have been better, but it survived. Right, D. Maxwell. I have 2 Dendrobium hybrids, both with Parisiae in the parentage. Good fragrance then. Where the original cane is just a small, stubby, leafless lump. Strange description. And the new cane is really one keiki growing out the side at a 90-degree angle. Yeah, they do that. And 3 times the size of the original. It looks odd when that happens. I mean, myophyllum does that. It grows a cane and then grows a keiki that grows longer than the cane. You know, they do that, some of those types of Dendrobiums. Should I leave each keiki as is and let it take over the plant, or should I gently remove each one and pot that up instead? Each keiki has significant roots. Choice is yours. They do no harm on the plant if they've got their own roots, providing you make sure you hydrate those roots when you're watering, either by dunking the keiki or using a sprayer. But don't leave them in dry air, because those roots won't work. You know, they need some moisture somehow or other. If you take them off, you leave the energy in the existing plant. The keikis then have to survive on their own, and if they've got roots, they'll grow into new plants. So, I mean, my aphyllum, just so you know what we're talking about here, flipping thing out. This grows long canes, but where's the camera? But it also grows keikis with roots, and down here keiki with roots, and down the bottom, right down the bottom of the canes, are 3 large keikis, all of which are growing new growths now. That one's got 2 new growths. That one's got 1. That one's got 1. So these are now growing new growths on the keikis, on the cane. So this is now the 3rd lot of what you would have to call keikis, and these little things here would quite easily make a brand new plant, or in my case all 3 of them are going to come off and make a brand new plant. But that's what we're getting at, keikis off of canes. You can leave them on, they do no harm, providing they've got roots that you can hydrate and you remember to do so. Some people say they drain the plant. That's a natural thing. That happens in the wild. Yeah, I've seen pictures of these types of Dendrobiums in situ, and like you've got all the canes hanging down like a waterfall and bits sticking out at all angles. That's the keikis. So it's a natural thing. Right, then we've got, it's either Leon Ed or Leo Ned. Work it out. I don't have a question, just want, whoops, 23, not 24, missed that one. Right, next we've got Mona. I'm not sure I've seen these in your collection, but I'm sure you know all about them. I have a very mature and large Maxillaria tenuifolia. That's the coconut orchid because of its fragrance. That has not bloomed for me for about 2 years, and when it did, it only had 4 or 5 flowers. I now have 1 bloom only, and I'm wondering what I'm doing wrong. Not necessarily anything. I keep it hydrated, it's in small bark, and it's inside through the winter and outside in the, I'm just going to have to, I made the text bigger, but I have actually cut the end off of some of the, right, I've just gone down the size, so I'll have to squint now. Right, and outside in the summer, I need to repot soon. Any tips are appreciated. I also should divide, which I've never done as it's becoming a monster. I had such a monster. I divided it into 3. And guess where the biggest part went? It actually went to Danny. She may still have it, I don't know. But I have known a lot of growers that have had trouble with this one and others that don't. And when you try and look at the difference in the care, you can't find it. It just seems that some individual plants are reluctant to bloom and others just bloom their heads off. And you sort of think, well, what are you doing different? And you try and analyse it and you can't really see it. So all I'm going to do is give you the generic answer for a plant that won't bloom. Try giving it more light. The other thing I heard that might work as well is actually reduce the watering and the feeding for a period of 2 to 3 weeks. So like sort of semi-starve it, but don't let it shrivel, obviously. The other thing that is unusual about that particular plant is the way it grows, because it grows pseudobulbs on top of pseudobulbs, so you get like a growth with 4 or 5 bulbs on it. And that top bulb, the roots come right down all the sheaths down into the media. Now when I had that one, it's the only plant that I watered the plant as well as the pot, because those roots coming down those sheaths can dry out. That means the bulbs higher up are not getting enough hydration. So I used to water the whole plant, give it a good soak. But yeah, might not help, but try more light. Wanda Shaw. If new roots are growing outside of the pot and not in the media, well, I can supply you with suitable words to say. Does that mean your orchid will likely not bloom? It makes no difference. As long as the plant is being hydrated and fed sufficiently to provide an energy base that the plant can think to itself, I now have spare resources, I'll bloom. Because that's how they work. I know they haven't got a mind as such, but that's how the physiology of the plant works. To be able to bloom, it needs spare resources. The roots hanging over the pot, providing you deal with them. I mean, what some people do is they cut a pot. So like take a third off of the edge of the pot and wrap it round with string or wire or something onto the side of the pot and put some media in it and let those aerial roots go down into that. So you haven't got to repot, but you've looked after those roots and made them okay, if you see what I mean. So an idea. But it doesn't affect blooming unless you start reducing the strength of the plant, because those roots are drying out and not keeping that bulb hydrated. That's not a question either, so that's down to 22 now. I don't know how far down we are. Right, Dave Dewey. I have several nobly typed dendrobiums with leafless canes that have bloomed at every node. Well, once they've done that, they're not going to bloom again. They are starting to look unsightly with multiple non-producing canes. When do I remove the canes from the plant, and how many? This is a maths game. An example. You've got a nobly type with 10 canes. 6 of them have got leaves on, and 2 or 3 are latest growths, which means you've got 4 leafless ones. You could take all 4 of them off because you've got 6 good ones. Now come down. You've got a plant with 5 canes, 2 of which have got leaves on and one's a new growth, and 2 are old leafless canes. If you take those 2 off, you've nearly cut the plant in half. You see what I'm getting at? It's a maths thing. You need to look at the whole volume of the plant as a unit, because those canes, unless they're totally shriveled and dry, in which case they're serving no purpose, they do need to come off. But if there's still room to store some goodness in there, it's a unit. The plant is a unit. And it's like I said, it depends the ratio between the old leafless canes, maybe starting to look a bit unsightly, and the new shiny good ones with the leaves on. If you had a plant with 20 canes on and a dozen of them were leaved canes and a proportion of those were nice new canes, you could take all the old ones off because you've still left a strong, healthy plant. So go steady. If you've got 5 canes and 3 of them are leafless and you take them off, you've only got 2 now. You see, it's not an exact science, but that's the principle. Do you keep regular plants too? That comes from Squeaky. Lots of E's in there, isn't there? 2 lots of double E. Simple answer, no. No, I don't. I have plants out in the garden, obviously, but not indoors, no. The Phalaenopsis on the kitchen windowsill are it. I used to have some ferns around the house, but I kept forgetting to water them and they kept dying, so I stopped doing it. How can you tell how old an orchid is? Under normal circumstances, by the number of bulbs. I'll say bulbs here, not canes. Except that when a plant gets really strong, it will produce more than one. But like a Cattleya, some Cattleyas, especially species, will progress 1 pseudo bulb per year. So just count them. But then if you got it as a division, you've lost those young bulbs, so you can't do that. So strictly speaking, there is no way, because it depends where you've got them from. If you've got them as seedlings and you've maintained every single bulb and it grows 1 a year, count them. Now some rhizome type orchids will split. So where there was 1 last year, this year it's grown 2. Well, if you can still see that split, you can still count that as like those 2 are a single year. And if they become 4, first of all, do that because you're doing really well. It doesn't happen often. But no, there is no perfect way to tell. Not really. Right, we've now got Susan Crease, I think that is. Kreis. Sorry, where I've gone down to smaller text now. I'm screwing my eyes up here. But they were going off the end, so I was missing parts of them, so I've had to do this. Answered a question, some questions a few years ago. My orchid collection has suffered because of circumstances, but I'm slowly working on it. Yeah, mine was called moving house. Also, trying to choose a little more wisely. I suffer from pretty blooms must have. We've all done that. I still do it sometimes. Even though I come home, smack my hand and say, stop it, you should know better by now, I still do it. If you think about back at Wisley, although it's a type of plant I absolutely adore, I spent a number with 2 zeros on the end on a single plant, and then I went back and did it again. That was donated money, otherwise I couldn't do that sort of thing. So that was pretty blooms must have. Now I've got to look after those plants. Ooh, they've got to be potted on soon as well. Right. And then we get on to reading the rest of the question. It says, this isn't a question really. Duh. Just a thank you for the channel and everything going on sort of thing. Perhaps I could talk about analysing an environment and how to find suitable orchids that would do well in certain types of environments. That's more like a Sunday chat thing, not for Q's and A's. Right, where are we now? We've got Sommerfuglen. I presume that would be pronounced. Right. In the interest of growing a wide range of orchids, I would like to learn about setting up microclimates in the same grow space. Aside from light, what differences in microclimate conditions do I have? Now, not much. It is the light that is the main variable. Top shelf up the back here, good light. Top shelf up the front, which now gets the sun through the roof, very good light. Yeah. Next shelf down, 1 stage down. 3rd shelf, shady. So I can do light and shade. As far as humidity is concerned, the whole place gets the same now, and it doesn't get it anywhere near as high as it used to be around the other place because I don't get the temperature, so I don't need it basically. I keep my humidity around 70%. It goes up a little bit more than that at night. And that depends how often the heater kicks in at night. on a mild night. The heater's not coming on much now. Something that is useful for creating microenvironments are heat mats. And if you combine a heat mat with a humidity tray, so basically you've got like a tray that holds water, doesn't leak in other words, and you put a heat mat in there. Let me rephrase this, not heat mat, heating cable. That's what I mean, sorry I said it wrong, heating cable. It's a little wire that you twist around like that, and then you put some damp sand or small stones with some water or something like that, and stand some plants on there. They'll benefit from that heat and the extra humidity. That's a microclimate. Microclimate with airflow. Some orchids object to having fans on them. Some of the Oncidium types, their leaves are so thin that the fan dehydrates them. They like air movement around them but not at them. There's a difference between at them. But yeah, you can provide microclimates with airflow depending on the types of plants, and again depending on the temperatures. Temperature microclimates are relatively easy. You just provide heat in certain areas and not in others. You often need to start thinking about separate places to get microenvironments, like a different window. You've got a west-facing window and an east-facing window, northern hemisphere. So one sunrise and one sunset, they're different. Sunrise has got very little heat in it. Sunset has. Yeah? There's a difference. It's not just light. There is a difference in temperature going on as well. And also opening a window. Fresh air. Fresh air is good for orchids. Fresh air in the middle of winter, not so good. Right, where are we then? I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that. Sheikilat. You can make what you will of that. I'm not having a go. I mean, there's different languages use different alphabets and different combinations of letters that I don't understand, because it's not in part of how my language is made up. They're all made up at the end of the day, aren't they? I bought a couple of Phalaenopsis orchids. No, that's it. It's a downward slope from there. One of them had some light rounded rings on the leaves. Oh dear. The other one doesn't have spots, but some of the leaves are curved downwards. Do they have a virus? If so, what do I do with them? Difficult to prove a virus without a test kit, and they're very expensive. They're probably twice the cost of the plant. Bear that in mind. Phalaenopsis leaves naturally curve, and some of them have quite an abrupt turn at the end with the point pointing straight downwards, so they do naturally curve that way. So that can be natural. Spots on leaves, it happens, you know, it can be all sorts of things. Rings on leaves are a different thing. If you've got a ring that still shows the original colour of the leaf in the middle, in other words it's a true ring, it is likely to be ring spot virus, which is contagious. It can be passed from plant to plant, especially through sharing water. More so if you get the plant wet and that water then goes down through the pot and gets used for another one. It is spreadable. You have to put the value of the other plants against the value of the plant. But if it's got genuine rings, separate it straight away. Don't leave it near any other plants. Get it right away from anything else and monitor it. Just keep your eye on it. If it seems to be getting worse and it seems to be going downhill, fast, slow, then the chances are it is a virus, and well, basically I'll say discard. Ideally take it out in the yard and put a flamethrower on it to stop it spreading anywhere else. But yeah, it ought to be discarded. But give it a chance, monitor it. See what happens if you get new leaves. If new leaves come out clean and after several months have still not got any spots on them, it could have been some sort of physical damage that just manifested itself like that. I've had some spots in the past that, well, never mind how they happen because it was my stupidity. That, when it's freshly poured out, doesn't do well on plant leaves. And the splashes made spots, but on the newer leaves that were still growing, they turned into rings. They grew into rings, but they didn't start out as rings. They started out with splashes from coffee. I fell basically, and the coffee got discarded willy-nilly and then landed on some plants. Right, but if in doubt, treat it as a virus, I would say, and get rid of it. But, you know, I mean, I've had several sentimental plants that I'm pretty certain had a virus, and you reluctantly let them go, but it's the safest thing. I also know several people who've lost like half of their collection to one plant that came in virused, and they never took notice of it. Right, we've next got Blaze Zeroni. A few years ago I bought a young Dendrobium that was too young to bloom. That happens. This year it had its third flowering, but it's the first time with a good fragrance and 2 whole canes of flowers. Before that it was 2 flowers at the most. I'm getting good growth, but the canes are still fairly short. I'd like to know how you can tell when a Dendrobium nobile is mature as a plant, and how do you tell when any plant reaches specimen size? Well, if you find out, can you let me know? Our Orchid Society committee members had a discussion on, somebody said, could we do a chat at a meeting about what makes up a specimen plant? And as none of us could clearly define it, we backed out and decided not to do it. I mean, as a judge would class a specimen plant it as good as or better than any that they've ever seen of that particular plant type. So it's like as good as it gets sort of thing. But that's more a prize winner than a specimen. You can have a specimen plant that's only half the size of this mythical one I've just discussed, still classed as a specimen plant. So it's difficult. I class it as an undefinable thing. You can't do it. Right, so what else do we have there? How do you tell when a plant is mature? Well, under normal circumstances it blooms, and it blooms regular on, as a Dendrobium, more than 1 cane. And also it's geared up to, you know, if it's a nobile type with 20 canes, well, show me one. Nobile type with 10 canes. Oh, I've seen some, I've had one. Yeah, one. None of my others have made that. Because they're losing canes, hopefully at a slower rate than they're gaining them. But it's just difficult to say. It sounds like your plant is doing fine. You know, if you're getting flowers over the whole length of a cane on the nobile, it's good. A lot of people just get a couple near the top and that's their lot. So you buy them with leaves, with blooms right down the cane, and that's the last time you'll ever see that. It's, you know, a lot of people find it impossible to do it again. And a bonus question? Never heard of such a thing. How can you tell if your plants are getting the right amount of airflow or not enough or too much? The leaves should just move. If they're doing that in the wind, too much. If they're absolutely stationary, possibly not enough. But a lot of orchids like their airflow around them, like I said before, not at them. My airflow in here is a single fan over there that just about makes the plants move in the opposite corner, and it doesn't oscillate. But what it does do is push the air into that corner. It then has to go somewhere else. It's moving, so it's got to go sideways, upwards and downwards, and then that circles round and gets drawn into the back of the fan again. So in other places it's moving hardly noticeably, but it is moving. It has to, because the fan's running. The other big fan that's with the heater is quite a bit bigger and oscillates. So as the heater pushes the heat out in a single direction, the oscillating fan is above it doing this. So as the heat comes out and rises, it gets caught in that, and that spreads it around the whole place, which stops me getting hot and cold spots. But yeah, if you want to really test it, get something light, like a tissue paper, and just hold it. Does it move? Because that's lighter than any of your orchid leaves, yeah? So, a way of testing. Right, where are we? Next one. Errant. Here comes trouble. What do you want? You know it? I keep thinking, you know it's raining, you don't want to go out, but he doesn't. He's nearly deaf. He hardly hears anything now. So he has to walk outside and go, woo, and turn around and run back in. So he can't hear it on the roof anymore. When I first moved in here, if it was raining and that sound was on the roof, he wouldn't even come through this door. He used to just turn and hurriedly walk away. No, I'm not going out there, it's wet. And now he can't hear it, so he doesn't know it's raining unless he can physically see it or go out in it. Right, where do we get to? Errant. As a newbie to orchids, we were all one of them once. I recently, 4 months ago, potted up a couple of new novelty phals in a bark and sphagnum mix. I purchased the moss on Etsy. That's that craft thing, craft version of eBay, I think that is. I haven't used it, as I didn't know where else to buy it at the time. And when it arrived, I noticed it has grown new green stems. So I believe it was fresh sphagnum moss. If it was, and I don't know whether you're UK or EU or what, but if it's live sphagnum moss, it's 90 to 95% certain it's not the right type of moss. I tried using live sphagnum, collected wild, one of our native species, and it was absolute rubbish. It really didn't work. The dried moss that we tend to use, I'm not going to get the packet, I can show you what it looks like on a plant that's dry, that needs water now. This is what the New Zealand moss looks like. It's very large grain with, you know, sturdy stems, and that is the good stuff for orchids basically if you're going to use moss. Don't you fall over. Hasn't long been repotted, that needs watering. I'll do that in a minute. Right, now just a few months later it's looking very worse for wear in the pot. White, brown colour, and little hairs have started falling off, but it doesn't smell. How do I tell when? So these questions are getting chopped off. Yeah, they were getting chopped off for a different reason. Now they're even smaller. Right, he's gone out and had a look and saw that it's raining, so he's gone back in again now. Don't you start yowling. You can do without that. Oh, here we go. How do I tell when moss has gone bad and needs changing versus what moss just looks like after a few months of being moist? Quite honestly, the chances are that's not the right type of moss, and if it is that type of sphagnum moss, if it dries out it tends to die. And then when, I mean, I know areas where there's native sphagnum moss, I know that we get a warm spell and the water that it's sitting on dries up completely, it will go brown and stink and it's horrible. And then when it rains enough that that water comes back again, it does start to regrow, and all that stuff that died sinks to the bottom and turns into a peat-like substance. Yeah. But yeah, I'd class that type of moss as a bit iffy, especially for Phalaenopsis, because they don't need to be soggy. They don't need constant wet. They like to be watered and then allowed to virtually dry out. So, and they like a lot of air around their roots, so they're not. In very high temperatures you can get away with moss and Phalaenopsis, but if your temperatures aren't good, it's probably better to just not have the moss, quite honestly. Right, next. How many more have we got to go? Oh, only a couple. How long have we been going? Oh, goodness me, I can't see. Where is it? Where's the time gone? Oh, there we are, 50 minutes. Yeah, I said it would be nearly an hour, didn't I? Never mind. If you're still there and not fallen asleep, well done. Right, Christine. Oh, hang on, missed one. Julie Pascal, I do have a question. Is it a problem when new growth leaves stay folded in half instead of opening up? I've had this happen on an Oncidium and an Odontoglossum type. For this discussion, one and the same. Especially as most of the odonts have been reclassed as Oncidiums anyway. They're just Oncidiums now. But it's also beginning to happen on a couple of Cattleya seedlings that I have. Is something wrong with my growing environment, or am I just impatient? And the leaf hasn't gotten large enough to flare open yet. Under normal circumstances, I'd say there's not enough pushing the plant. So that could be feed, it could be water, it could be both. But under normal circumstances, the growth pattern would just be normal and leaves open at, you know. And for that plant, an individual plant, you need to know what it did last time to find out if this is normal. You see what I mean? If it's the first new leaf, then you don't know what's normal for that individual plant. But I've had it happen on Dendrobiums, I've had it happen on Cattleyas, and I've had it happen on Oncidium types. So it does happen. I've even had it on Maxillaria. It does happen. Under normal circumstances, they will start to show signs of opening near the bottom. And what I've done is I've actually just gently tucked my finger in and slid it upwards and helped them to open. Then they seem to open normally. But if you think you're going to damage the leaf by doing that, then don't do it. You know I can get away with it. But yeah, I cannot give an explanation apart from the fact that the plant hasn't got the energy to push that as hard as it needs to. And it may well open up later down the line. It's unlikely to be lack of light, because I've seen plants that are higher light plants grown in quite heavy shade. They grow into beautiful plants with lovely dark green leaves, but you won't ever see a bloom on them. Right, next one, Christine. I've been watering my orchid collection with RO water with some MSU fertiliser around 160 parts per million, about once a week, and I've noticed some pots are getting some white residue build up. Firstly, especially if you're talking about a bark media here, that might not be a residual build up, that might be mould, short and simple, which usually forms on the top of the pot, and it is white or grey white in colour. So what you might want to try doing is getting a fungicide of some sort and spraying the top of your pot and see if it gets rid of it, because it could be mould. Feeding at that level, I can't imagine it's going to leave a build up, but easy way around that is just flush the media. Give it a good flush with clean RO water, and then come back a couple of hours later and do it again. So that what you've done is you've watered and washed a lot out, but you've dissolved what's left by leaving it wet, and then come back and wash that off, and that should get rid of it, if it is build up. However, if it's mould, when it dries out, it'll be there again, and it'll keep getting worse. So that's that one. How to prevent it going forward? Well, it depends what it is in the first place. But feeding at that level shouldn't really form any build-up. Unless, well, when it could happen, for instance, is a plant that's in a pot that's far too big, that's got quite a small root system. In other words, in that pot is too much feed for that plant. Do you see what I mean? Right. Next and last one, according to this. This is Ronnie Nelson. God, Brian, this text gets any smaller, I could go cross-eyed. Right, I've just watched the most recent Project Orchid video and I've realised I'm not clear about flushing orchids. Is it the same for all types of orchids throughout the year? I apologise if this is a duh question. No, you can have duh answers, but you don't get duh questions. Right, the concept of flushing is to avoid the build-up of residual fertiliser that hasn't been used by the plant. The secret to not having to worry about it is don't put too much in the pot in the first place. Most orchids don't need a lot of feed, and those that do are like relatively well known, like Cymbidiums, Vandas. I think Cattleya might be heavy feeders. If it's classed as a heavy feeder, then it can take higher levels, but only when they're growing. Most orchids have a period when they're not doing anything, you know, and at that point they won't be using up the fertiliser if you put it in there. So the concept of flushing is to wash out any residual. To do it properly needs clean water, so like rainwater, RO water, something like that, and you pour a lot of it through the pot. Then leave it for a while, a few hours, and then do it again. That pot's now well flushed. I only do it once because I do it relatively frequently and I don't feed at high levels, so I can get away with it. But places where feed will build up are pots that have moss in, for a start. My holy clay pots have large chunks of bark that don't hold hardly any water, so you pour a litre of water in the top and almost a litre comes out the bottom. There's no build up in there. So that's the concept of flushing, is to wash out unused feed and give it a clean. There's another thing that happens depending on how tightly packed your media is. When you fill a pot with, you know that that holy clay pot I was just mentioning, by pouring water in that pot, it's impossible for the water to come up to the top of the pot because it gets out faster than it could ever do that. But if it had like small bark and moss, it is possible to pour water in at such a rate that you fill the pot with water. Then what happens? What have you just got rid of? You got rid of all the stale air, and then the water flows out the bottom and it's replaced by new air that's fully oxygenated. So there's actually another role that flushing can do in more tightly packed media, is to change the air, which is orchid roots need oxygen basically, so they need some air around them, some more than others. Right, and here endeth. That's a long video. There's bits in there that are probably okay for everybody. There's some that are a bit specific to certain, well, the person who asked it at least, and I've managed to give an answer, might not be the best answer, to all of them. So that's good. That doesn't always happen. I've had questions and answer sessions where I've got to a question and I've just had to say, I don't know, you know. And a lot of that is to do with, it's a question about a type of plant that I don't or have never grown. And I'm not going to know much about that at all, because I tend to do the research and the work on the ones I've got or I'm about to get. And that's the way I work. Okay, so hope you enjoyed that and got something out of it. Still raining. What's the time now? What's the time now? 10:30. That's 5 hours plus. Nearly 6 hours it's been raining solid. That's a lot of rain. Well, we won't be watering anything in the garden for a long time now. And I think we got a reasonable day tomorrow, and then we got more heavy rain on Monday. So I'm not going to need to get out there with a hose for, you know, probably Wednesday or Thursday, depending on how warm it is, which is good. Yeah, it's good. Right, I will see you tomorrow for the Sunday chat. If you've managed to get this far on this video, I'd give you an award if I could for just sticking with it. So well done. But what I will say is, if you're not subscribed, it would be also awfully nice if you did so. Yeah? I'm still trying to grow this channel, slowly but surely. The number of subscribers still has a meaning to YouTube. The views are more important, I think, nowadays, but the number of subscribers still helps. And also the comments, all that sort of stuff, and don't forget the old thumbs up. And I'll see you tomorrow for the Sunday chat, and it's not going to be as long as this one. I did nothing on my talk yesterday, embarrassing. I just couldn't get in the mood, but I'm hoping to do some later today. At this point in time, I should be watching the King coming out of Buckingham Palace and, you know, big parade and all that sort of stuff. I'm not for the monarchy, but when an event like this takes place, and there hasn't been one for 70 years, and it's on the telly for a few hours, I'll watch some of it. I'll probably get bored, but I'll watch some of it, you know. It's a historical event, you know. I think this ceremony has been going over 1,000 years. There are some countries, no names mentioned, that haven't got a history that goes back 1,000 years, because they weren't even discovered then. And all the ceremonies that were there prior to them being discovered have probably been wiped out. See you next time. Thanks for dropping by. We all have our problems.